Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. So of course I made the mistake that I always make, and that was I started engaging with somebody on Twitter that I thought I could actually have a debate with, and I should have known if I had actually read the original tweet thoroughly and understood where the person was coming from, that I would have recognized that I could not have a debate with this person. But I want to walk through what the person said, because I did some calculations to figure out just how far off I was. So the tweet was tweeted out yesterday, November 11 at 8:31 in the morning by a woman named Lauren Duca, D-U-C-A. Now, I don't know who Lauren Duca is. She's a verified account. So I think that's why it must have, I think it appeared in my timeline because somebody else had retweeted this, and I read what I could read, and then I went to her timeline so that I could read the entire tweet. And if I'd read the entire tweet, I probably wouldn't have engaged with her to start with. But Lauren Duca describes herself as an award-winning and losing journalist. She's a pothead dyke, according to her own profile. Parentheses, her profile says, "I'm immensely proud of my book, quote, How to Start a Revolution, close quote, and I hope you'll read it." She has almost, and this is the scary part to me, she has 415,000 followers, and she follows about 7,700 people. I haven't looked to see who she follows. I don't really care. She doesn't follow me. I only ran into this tweet. I literally ran into this tweet because one of my followers had retweeted it, and I just was able to read the first two paragraphs. So let me tell you what she tweeted yesterday at 8:31 a.m. So on a Monday morning, she decides to tweet, according to the New York Times, if Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax had been in effect since 1982. Now, I don't know why she picks 1982, but she picks 1982. She says that Jeff Bezos, who you know is the owner of Amazon, the owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos would have had $46.8 billion instead of $160 billion last year. So the first paragraph reads in its entirety, according to the New York Times, if Warren's wealth tax had been in effect since 1982, Jeff Bezos would have had $46.8 billion instead of $160 billion last year. And of course, when I read that, I thought, well, whose business is it of yours how much money Jeff Bezos has? Then the second paragraph, instead of $97 billion, Bill Gates would have had 13.9. She doesn't say billion, but I assume 13.9 billion, and she doesn't mean $13.90, although that's technically what it says. Then she says, that's hugely significant and still way more than anyone deserves. And she puts the word deserves in quotation marks. Now you think that alone is enough to draw my ire, but it doesn't. She then puts this as the last sentence. If I had seen the last sentence, I probably would have still engaged with her, and I probably still would have retweeted her and said what I said about her, but she then says, tax the effers. Insert the F-bomb. So as a whole, her tweet reads as follows. According to the New York Times, if Warren's wealth tax had been in effect since 1982, Jeff Bezos would have had $46.8 billion instead of $160 billion last year, and instead of $97 billion, Bill Gates would have had $13.9 billion. That's hugely significant and still way more than anyone deserves. Tax the effers. I find it incredibly offensive. Who is she to determine how much wealth someone deserves? This is the freaking United States of America. And anybody, I don't care whether you are the lowliest wage earner or you are Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. In this country, we don't care how much money somebody has. All we care is that they earn their money fair and square by starting a business, by inheriting it, by creating some new app, some new device. In the case of Bill Gates, by creating an entire new operating system, an entire new line of computer programming. And in the case of Jeff Bezos, completely upending retail and being a complete disruptor. Now, why she picks on Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, I don't know, because she could have easily have picked on Warren Buffett, who quite honestly made all of his billions by investing in the market. But I guess that's okay, but creating your own business, as Bezos and Gates did, well, that's not okay. But I'm really offended by the idea that the amount of money, even after an Elizabeth Warren wealth tax, she says that's still hugely significant and still way more than anyone deserves. So tax the effers. I'm so offended by that because that's not what America is about. So I decided to do some calculations and try to figure out exactly, if we're going to tax the effers, what would that do in terms of funding the federal budget? Before I even get into the numbers, I want you to think about a whole host of things. First, I'm making an assumption here that most of the wealth of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates is tied up in ownership of their respective companies. In other words, tied up in stock. Now, obviously, they have art, they have real estate, they have all sorts of assets, but the majority of their wealth, let's assume for a moment, is tied up in stock. If we're going to somehow reduce the amount of wealth they have by taxing it, and most of that wealth is in stock, that means they either have to borrow against that stock, they have to arbitrage, they have to leverage that stock, or they have to sell the stock, which means that Jeff Bezos would have to sell, what would it be? $114 billion worth of stock. Can you imagine what that would do to the price, to the per share value of stock in Amazon if he had to sell that number of shares in order to reach that dollar amount to pay a wealth tax? Now, it would not, the price drop in this value, in the per share price of Amazon would not affect just Jeff Bezos. That would affect every institutional investor, every mutual fund, every retirement fund, every mom and pop, every retired individual that decided, hey, a long time ago I thought this Amazon thing sounds kind of crazy, but I'll put $100 in it. The paper losses that those people would see in the value of their stock would be overwhelming. And the same is true with Bill Gates. So the idea that you could tax this wealth and force these people to share stock, or for that matter, to liquidate any other assets, to reach that kind of reduction in their net worth would cause whatever those assets are to instantly lose value. But that's neither here nor there, because nobody cares about retirement funds. Nobody cares about mutual funds. Nobody cares about, some poor schmuck that's got a little bit of money invested in the stock market. We don't care about those people. All she cares about is taxing the effers, as she says in her tweet, and taking away as much money as possible. So I decided to look up the federal budget for 2018. The federal budget for 2018 was $4 trillion. It was actually 4+ trillion, but I rounded it down to 4 trillion. Do you know how much money that is that the federal government spends every single day? $10.95 billion, or about $11 billion that we spend every single day, which means that we spend about $456 million every single hour. Every hour. But let's go back to the day. I want to work on a per day basis. So we spend $10.95 billion a day. According to Lauren Duca, Jeff Bezos originally had $160 billion. But if we take away 46, or we reduce his net worth down to 46 billion, she says 46.8 billion. I'm going to round these numbers up. So nothing's going to come out exactly right. So if Jeff Bezos had $160 billion, she wants to reduce that to $46 billion. That means she wants to tax Jeff Bezos $114 billion. How many days of federal government spending would that pay? I think many people believe that if we took $114 billion away from Jeff Bezos, that would solve our deficit. That would solve the budget deficit. Why, hell's bells, that would solve the entire federal budget. Let's just tax Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, and nobody else will ever have to pay taxes again. The $114 billion that Lauren Duca wants to take away from Jeff Bezos would fund the federal government for 10.4 days. Not even 2 weeks. 10.4 days. Let's go to Bill Gates. She says that Bill Gates, instead of having $97 billion, would have only had, and she said $13.9 billion. I rounded it up to $14 billion, which means she wants to take away from Bill Gates $83 billion with a wealth tax. Have you done your calculations yet? Now remember, we're spending $10.95 billion in the federal budget every single day. So now she wants to take $83 billion away from Bill Gates. That would fund the federal budget for about 7.5 days. 7.5 days. So if you combine the two, Jeff Bezos at 10.4 days and Bill Gates at 7.58 days, you get 17.98 days. You get 18 days. You don't even get a month. You barely get 2 weeks. You get about 2.5 weeks of federal spending by taxing these two people out the wazoo. And that's not even counting what it does to the stock market price of Amazon and Microsoft. That, can you imagine how many, I bet the Public Employee Retirement Association here in Denver, the teacher retirement, the government employee retirement system, I bet they own Amazon stock and I bet they own Microsoft stock. So the value that PERA would have to fund retiree accounts would be reduced by whatever the value of the holdings are that they have in Amazon and Microsoft because of this stupid wealth tax that Elizabeth Warren wants to do and Lauren Duca wants to do because she hates billionaires. If you took everything, let's just say instead of reducing their wealth, we just tax them at 100% of their wealth. We want to take all of Jeff Bezos' $160 billion, and we want to take all of Bill Gates' $97 billion. That gives us $257 billion, or, by my calculations, about 23.5 days. Not even a month's worth of spending. And then, think about this. Once you spend all of that money for those 23.5 days, it's gone forever, never to return. You talk about an economy crushing. You talk about destroying entrepreneurship. You talk about destroying an incentive for anybody to start a company, knowing that you're going to have whatever you reach in terms of your success, $1 billion, $10 billion, $100 billion, I don't care what it is. You have now disincentivized people from striving to make as much as possible. And if you read the mentions in my Twitter timeline, most of these people are all upset because I don't care about the poor. Tell me, if we take all $257 billion that we take away from Jeff Bezos and we take away from Bill Gates, how does that help the poor? Because even if you give all of that money to people making less than $25,000 a year, that's a one-shot deal. A one-shot deal. You know what we ought to do is we should, instead of demonizing these people, tax the effers, as she says, is we ought to be encouraging more and more people to start their own business, to make it more amenable to start businesses in this country, to reduce the taxation, to reduce the regulatory burden. But I don't want to stop this podcast without going to the one thing that drives me up the wall the most. And that's the idea that whatever is left over for Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos is still way more than anyone deserves. Do you remember Elizabeth Warren? Because Elizabeth Warren is the one that's proposing the wealth tax. And Elizabeth Warren is the one that Lauren Duca says that, yeah, we ought to take this money from Bezos and Bill Gates. Remember this?
Well, this is class warfare, this is whatever. No, there is nobody in this country who got rich on his own. Nobody. You built a factory out there, good for you, but I want to be clear. You moved your goods to market on the roads the rest of us paid for.
No. They moved the goods on the roads that we all paid for. And those who made more money paid more taxes. And quite frankly, depending on what state you're in, those roads may have been paid by property taxes as opposed to ad valorem taxes, as opposed to income taxes, which means if you built a big-ass factory in Texas, your property taxes were a hell of a lot more paying for a road than somebody that owns a single-family home somewhere. Elizabeth Warren is full of it, but she continues.
You hired workers. The rest of us paid to educate.
Oh, who pays for education? Everybody. Everybody pays for education. Well, no, Michael, only those people who own property. Yeah, so if I own an apartment building, I pay ad valorem taxes, property taxes, on that apartment building. Where do you think I get the money to pay for the ad valorem taxes? From the rent that is paid by the people that lease the apartments in my apartment building. The renters pay those taxes. I don't. I collect that every single month that I collect rent from a renter. She continues.
You were safe in your factory because of police forces and fire forces that the rest of us paid for.
Why does she keep saying the rest of us paid for these things? Because we all pay for these things. This is absolute class warfare. When what's her name? Lauren Duca. When she keeps saying that the money that's left over for Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates is still more than anybody deserves, ask yourself this question. Who's the arbiter of how much any one individual deserves? How much do you deserve? How much do I deserve? How much does your neighbor deserve? How much does the wealthiest person that you actually know deserve? How much does the poorest person whom you actually know deserve? And who's going to be the arbiter of how much each of those individuals deserves? What's the criteria? I'll tell you who they want the arbiter to be, and that's the government. They want the government to be the arbiter of how much money any one individual can make. And that arbiter, the government, is a false god. Because the government, which is made up of human beings, just like you and me, they're going to decide how much an individual can or cannot make. That's up to my own initiative. That's up to your initiative. But when you think about these are the people that are running for president, and these are the people, and I know that Twitter is not a good cross-section of Americans, but when you think about it, if you could read, in fact, I would encourage you to do it. Go to my Twitter timeline. Go to @MichaelBrownUSA and read through the replies to my retweet of her tweet. And you'll be absolutely, well, you'll either be saddened, maddened, or depressed by the economic illiteracy that exists among the American public. You can tax these people all you want to. It's never going to get us out of debt. It's never going to cover the budget. But it'll make people feel good because we hate millionaires and billionaires. Thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. I'll talk to you tomorrow.